Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Robin Wansley, and I'm the chair of the Administration and Enterprise Oversight Committee, also known as AO. I'm going to call to order our regular meeting for today, which is Monday, February 12th, 2024. I will have the clerks call the roll.
Councilmember Vita,
Present.
Ellison,
Here.
Cashman,
Present.
Trictai,
Present.
Vice Chair Palmisano,
Present.
and Chair Wansley.
Present.
We have 6 present.
All right, let the record reflect that we have quorum. All right, committee members, we have 16 items on our consent agenda, which I will now read for the public record. Number 1 is a passage of resolution for a gift acceptance from the Federal Emergency Management Agency of travel expenses. Number 2 is approving a migrant crisis legislative directive. Number 3 is accepting bid for Pioneers and Soldier Memorial Cemetery Masonry Pier Repair Project. Number 4 is accepting bid for Hennepin Ave South Reconstruction Project. Number 5 is authorizing contract amendment with Wellen Associates for National Incident Management System, Reset Training Maintenance. Number 6 is authorizing contract with One Neck IT Solutions, LLC, for providing outsourced IT services. Number 7 is authorizing contracts with various vendors for loan administration of Minneapolis Homes Access Down Payment Assistance Program. Number 8 is authorizing master contract amendment with Division of Indian Work for the continued provision of health and human services. Number 9 is authorizing master contract amendment with the Center for Energy and Environment for Environmental Services. 11 is authorizing a contract amendment for the video surveillance upgrade project at the Convention Center. 11 is authorizing contract amendment with CoStar Realty Information, Inc. for access to real estate information database. Number 12 is authorizing contract amendment for yard maintenance services. 13 is approving legal settlement for Brett Haig v. City of Minneapolis. 14 is approving legal settlement Anthony Watson v. City of Minneapolis, John Vick, and Mark Dole. 15 is approving legal settlement Brittany Jalen Rodriguez v. Riddler Heating and Cooling, Inc. and Sean David West in the Minneapolis Bicycle Coalition v. Oscar Romero. 16 is referring to staff the subject matter of an ordinance related to information governance policy. With that, we have covered the items on the consent agenda. Is there any discussion on these items before? Well, I see none from the rest of my committee members, but I did put myself in queue to speak to item number 2, which is the Migrant Crisis Legislative Directive. Just want to briefly share that I authored this legislative directive after conversations with the Neighborhood and Community Relations Department so that this committee can continue working continuing our work relating to immigration and welcoming and supporting new residents of our city. Staff will present the current programs, services, and partnerships available to local immigrants residing in Minneapolis, as well as do an overview on current policies, practices, and protocols in place for city staff who interact with immigrant and refugee populations. This can be a starting place for how we want to expand or develop the city's practices to best ensure we have appropriate infrastructure in place to welcome the new influx of migrants. I'm sure many of you have seen, lots of media and attention on what's happening with the increased numbers of immigrants arriving in New York and Chicago. So the intent of this legislative directive is to bring forward information so the council has clarity on how best to respond to increased residents in our city and community. There will be a need for a coordinated approach with our other governmental partners, and this directive is the first step and understanding the impacts of the south of the border crisis. So I also want to share that this legislative directive will also likely result in a study session because immigration is a complex issue and there's lots of information to unpack. and we want to make sure council is well informed about these matters and how they impact our local residents. And I'm really appreciative of our staff who's going to be working with us to support us in this education. So wanted to provide that context. With that, is there any other questions on the consent agenda? I see no. Well, with that, I will move approval for all 16 items on the consent agenda. With that, we could just do a group call. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those not in favor say nay. All right, the ayes have it, and that motion carries. Committee members, we also have number 17, which is a contract with organizations providing services under the Minneapolis Strategic Outreach Initiative. This is under discussion. We do have staff here to do a presentation, which I will note, I don't believe we had this beforehand, so I'm pretty sure it will be on LIMS. And everyone should have received a copy of it in front of you. So I will now invite the staff members to come up and give a brief presentation on this.
Thank you, council members. One second. Thank you so much for inviting us in to give a brief overview and presentation on the contract amendments in front of you. I just wanted to add that these amendments not only include Minneapolis, but also YGVI contracts as well, and they're all in the same batch. Quick overview, the Minneapolis contracts were implemented in 2021 and amended through now. We would have been issuing an RFP on these contracts as well as the YGVI contracts. However, we believe it's in our best interest to amend these contracts and extend time for 1 year for several reasons. This gives us a little bit of extra time to collect good and sound data on these services. When these services were implemented, they did not start right away, and so boots on the ground have only really been operational for a little over 2 years. Good sound data collection would be collecting a good full 3 years of services so that we can determine the effectiveness of these initiatives, as well as give us some time to enhance processes and procedures so that we are in a place where we are compliant and ready to accept new talent into these initiatives. The Minneapolis initiative specifically was enacted in emergency situations. These are both evidence-based practices, and the recommendations were that we take 12 to 18 months to implement these services, to get them up and running, but the amazing work of staff and community members, we were able to get them up and running in 6 months. We are now at a place where it's time to really take a hard look at what was missing when we implemented services so quickly and provide an opportunity for our community partners to really do the most amazing work they can to ensure that these services are long-term and sustainable. This also gives us an opportunity to revise our RFP process to ensure that we've got clear, concise communication regarding our reporting requirements and expectations. I think this is only fair for any new talent that wants to participate in this initiative so that we are communicating effectively and we are welcoming people into a structure that is prepared to receive them. With the YGVI contracts, Council has already approved this initiative of GVI, which is the adult version, through 2024. Amending the YGVI, which is the youth version of the initiative, would bring them both into alignment, in addition to all of the above that I mentioned with the Minneapolis contract. I believe I actually covered this slide and everything that I just said. I got ahead of myself here. In essence, this gives us a chance to establish a solid framework so that we can provide the best support and guidance to our community partners, be prepared to accept on new talent, and give us the data that we need to determine the success and challenges of services. This is also in alignment with the work that's being done on the Safe and Thriving Communities report. And that third slide gives a quote directly from that report on page 5, paragraph 4. I know it's tedious, but I am going to read this because it is important. That report states that it is imperative that public safety leaders and stakeholders continuing adapt their policing organizations to new value propositions and methods of producing that value. To accomplish this, Minneapolis public safety organizations, that's us, must increase organizational capacity, the structures, systems, processes, and people that enable an organization to meet goals effectively and efficiently. And this capacity needs to not only be activated in real time, but also dynamic, being able to grow and adapt over time. This is the real-time action that we're asking you to take today. This is the time where we're asking, allow us to be dynamic in what we do and collect good data, good sound data, and stand up good sound processes for the community members that work so hard with these initiatives. Another area in the Safe and Thriving Communities report can be found on page 14, where it talks about the phased implementation approach. This is work that's going on right now. This is the near-term work, where we have recommendations that tell us to focus on improvements to the current prevention, response, and restoration services menu. That entire menu can be found in the Neighborhood Safety Department. Phase 1 is mostly focused on planning for long-term transformation, enhancing programs currently operated by the city, and improving service coordination and integration with the current system of care. And that is exactly what amending these contracts will achieve if we can extend for a little bit more time and create sound services and collect really good data. The analysis of the Safe and Thriving Communities report has shown that in certain areas, the city's biggest challenge is not a lack of services and initiatives, but instead a lack of coordination and systems for monitoring and continuous improvement. And that is what a decision today will help us do. I can stop right here, but honestly, I think I'm not going to. If it's okay that I continue, I don't want to take up all of the time. I just want all of us to keep in mind that the work that we're doing in neighborhood safety was never intended to be a part of city structure historically. This is work that began as a movement and turned into an industry. And because of that, we will be, particularly in 2024, encountering institutional structures that now have to shift to make room for us. These are structures that have been in place for years, and doing this work is going to require collaboration of community, council, and administration with a collective focus on the maintenance of the dignity of human beings so that we can create an ecosystem of services that become its own evidence-based model that's permanently embedded in the safety infrastructure of Minneapolis. And I will pause right there. There's some additional information in this PowerPoint, but it may not be necessary. So I'm gonna pause here and stop for questions unless council would like me to move forward with the rest. The rest is getting into the details a bit.
I would say Director Nelson Brown, you have a full presentation. Take the time you need to go through it, and then we can take up questions afterwards.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Wansley. So as we're talking about processes, you've heard me mention the processes and getting sound processes in place and strengthening processes. Just a quick overview of what some of those processes look like and why they're important and what we're working on right now, and this has an effect on all of our initiatives. There are processes like payment of invoices, the RFP process, and the contracting processes. Payment of invoices, strengthening that process is important because it tells the story of success and challenges for all of our initiatives in dollars and cents. And that's what we're really concerned with, right? How much does this work actually cost? In order to do that, we have to strengthen how we verify our expenses. It's a sound business practice. It protects the city and the organizations we fund and sets those organizations up for success so that they're sustainable long-term, no matter who we work with and who we fund. This is a process that needs to be strengthened in order to enhance services and ensure they'll be here for long-term. Our RFP process is another one. And it's important that we have clear and concise communication regarding review and selection. This is an area where we need to review and revamp in collaboration with the city attorneys and procurement. There's been questions in the past around our processes here. It is going to be vitally important as we move into the process of seeking new talent for those new services that council has already invested in, with my goal, and my colleagues in other departments are going to hate me, but my goal of having those in place by summer of 2024. And then that flows naturally right into the contracts and making sure that the information contained within is clear, concise, and in compliance. Another process that we've run into, our first example of encountering a challenge with the historical processes that were not prepared for us, started with staffing, right around staffing. The historical process, and I don't want to speak for other departments, I'll just speak to my experience. The historical process makes a lot of sense. It's based on number of employees, not the amount of work. But when you're talking about a department like neighborhood safety, and you compare us to our counterparts in OCS, MPD, Fire, 911, all of our departments have boots on the ground. The difference is that neighborhood safety's boots on the ground are community members and not city employees. And so that directly affects the number of staff a department has, as well as the corresponding salaries that staff receive for the amount of work. Yet we're providing the same types of services, including uniforms, vehicles, providing guidance and support to those boots on the ground. They're just not city employees. We're collaborating. So this has brought to light a way that our current structures can be stretched, and to make room for collaboration of this nature. There's no way that anyone could have really seen how much stretching would be involved ahead of time. And we are definitely working with our colleagues and our counterparts on making sure that this happens. I would be remiss to sit in front of you and talk about maintaining human dignity for everyone if I didn't start with maintaining the dignity of my staff and ensuring that they have the support they need, as well as corresponding salaries. So in conclusion, I will be back before you. You are going to see me a lot in the first and second quarters, particularly as I bring forward a full staffing plan, asking for support. And it's going to be vital for council and administration and enterprise together to be on the same page in order to express the urgency of this work and in order to move these processes that typically could be very slow moving, in order to move with a sense of urgency and reach my goal, our collective goal, of implementing the new services by summer of 2024. And that concludes. Thank you. I'll stand for questions.
Thank you, Director Nelson Brown. I will take a quick moment to see if any of my colleagues are in queue. I see Vice Chair Palmisano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm curious, Director, about your capacity right now in terms of staffing. we were told during the last budget process that you didn't have, in terms of staff positions filled, though capacity for them, enough staff to manage all the new programs that were being thrown at you during the budget process. But I also understood that the right staffing was going to be worked out in a little bit of a longer timeline than what you're sort of ambitiously suggesting here today. And we're all eager to move on this as fast as possible. But I also recognize that you need to organize and grow at your own rate. So could you help tell us a little bit more about your department's capacity and how you see it unfolding over this next year?
Thank you, Councilmember Palmisano. Apologies. It is definitely a challenge. It is going all of 2024 to really reach full capacity as we work on expanding and redesigning our department. Pulling out of the health department really created a challenge for us in that we lost a lot of support. We are actively in the middle of hiring several new positions right now, and we just went through the process of creating a deputy director position that is sitting in classifications right now. I believe that as we move forward through the first and second quarters and get staff on board, that's going to help tremendously. However, to see the department fully staffed in the capacity it needs to be, it will realistically take the entire year.
Mike.
Thank you for that. That's really thoughtful, and I understand from your very first, part of why we wanted to recruit you so badly to come and work for us was your very capable management of all kinds of state programs in Iowa, and we appreciate that this needs time to build the capacity for this. I also think you had imparted on me in a previous conversation just how much support the health department has, because the health department was essentially built on these kinds of grant. Our funding for the health department for many years was grant funding, and all of the oversight of that. You also mentioned that there are positions that you have that are stuck in classifications, and for colleagues of mine that are newer here, I just want to point out that that's a point in the HR process, and one that is at a bottleneck, and that we've tried to hire some consulting to get through. But that's a bottleneck for a lot of the positions in our city's enterprise right now. So thank you for that additional amount of detail. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, y'all can hear me. All right. Thanks, Vice Chair Palmisano. Next in queue, I see Councilmember Vita.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Wansley. Can you? I think so.
Yep.
Thank you. Just a couple quick questions. First, thank you for this presentation, and thank you for the meeting a couple of weeks ago with my office. You really clarified lots of things for me and got me to a place of supporting the action. Although I didn't know it was going to be this soon when we talked.
Sorry.
But no. You don't have to be sorry about it. But I'm there. Like, I appreciate the presentation today, and I also appreciate the time you took explaining your future for the next year for this department. A couple questions I have is, the first one is there going to be opportunity for you to change like some of the activities within these grants over the next year, or will they remain, will the expectations be exactly the same as they were?
Thank you, Councilmember Vita. Yes, there is opportunity for us to develop and enhance some of the expectations. The community members that are providing these services are aware and on board and actually excited about the opportunity of adapting and growing and adjusting. Of course, what we put in contract right now is as it stands. However, we always have the opportunity to work with procurement and city attorneys to amend again if there are specifics that we feel like are required for us to adjust. Most of it, I believe, community members, the organizations are willing to adapt and adjust as we need to make sure that those services are stellar and that they work for community. So as much as possible, we're going to be working very closely with our funded organizations to ensure that those services are stellar for our residents.
Thank you for that. And you said that YGVI is an extension of GVI, which is adults. And
Correct.
So this is young people. So is the YGVI program in collaboration with the county also?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
So what is can you explain to me like who we fund and how we fund the YGVI services?
So previously, thank you, Councilmember Vita. I'm still getting used to my etiquette, so please excuse me. So previously, our YGVI contracts were funded with ARPA dollars specifically. And now we are shifting over to general fund dollars. The collaboration with the county as well as probation plays a huge part in the youth-centered GVI programs in that they provide referrals for us, as well as MPD. For the adult GVI portion, it's mainly an MPD referral. So the biggest difference is right now, as it stands, is where the funding is coming from. So this allows us to effectively replace those ARPA dollars that are going away and bring this service into the general fund that is long-standing and long-serving, and making it a permanent part of our services as we review to ensure that the services are acceptable and work well, which so far data shows positive results nationwide, not just here.
Thank you. And my last question is, are you working with someone internally, or have you hired someone to do the research and collect the data that you spoke of that needs to be, the 3 years overall? Like, what has happened? What progress have we made? Where do we have room for improvement? Like, are you working with someone internally or externally to collect that?
Both internally and externally. So specifically for GVI and YGVI, we've made an offer for positions to specifically focus on this, which will include that data collection. We're also collaborating with OCS, with the policing project, NYU's policing project, to determine some metrics that make sense, and that would be for all of our programs and all of our initiatives. And we also, in that staffing plan that's coming to you soon, will also be some specific positions focused directly on data collection and analysis. Sadly, that is actually one of the areas that we lost support from the health department. So it's very important that, we make sure we have both internal and external support so that we can have a full comprehensive view of where we have our successes and where we have our challenges, how we fill in the gaps, and what new moves we need to make. We've got to be nimble and flexible in our data collection, and we have a plan to do just that.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilmember Wansley.
I have Councilmember Cashman.
Thank you, Chair Wansley. Thanks, Director Nelson, for being here. And don't worry about being new and not knowing the etiquette, because I'm right there with you as a new council member. I was just wondering if you could, at this point, provide any numbers behind like where your capacity is right now and where you're trying to go in the next year. And then secondly, around the RFP process, what are the current reporting requirements for these groups that are being funded? And maybe where do you see that headed more broadly around how your reporting requirements might change?
Thank you, Councilmember Cashman. So you have managed to ask the question that I did not bring materials with me today, but I would be happy to provide you specific numbers and specific details around what the RFP process looks like before, now, and as I see it in the future. In general, I can tell you as far the numbers I don't have with me. The RFP process, though, in general, I can tell you being much more clear and concise on what those requirements are, as well as our expectations around reporting requirements and verification of expenses should be clear and upfront right from the beginning before people apply. So that would put that right into the RFP process. In my vision, we'll also have that very transparent on our website so that there's no doubt and no question what you're getting into when you apply for funds. And that is something that can be strengthened and that we're working on right now. I hope that gives you, I'm sorry I don't have detail with me right now.
That's okay. Yeah, I just wanted to point out that those are, areas that I'm interested in learning more from you, working more from you, and how we can support you in that. So thanks for your work.
Thank you.
All right, next in queue is Councilmember Ellison.
Thank you, Chair Wansley. Thank you for the presentation. On the substance in front of us, I support these contract extensions. They make a lot of sense to me. So just wanted to state that. But as we were going through the presentation, there were a few things that there were a few questions that came up for me. In particular, I know there's a lot of discussion of kind of that things need to change, but I don't know that I was super clear on in what direction we're headed, right? The original concept for the Office of Violence Prevention, which is where this comes out of, was based on, some amalgam of like the Cure Violence model, these public health models, which is why I was in public health. And I know that, a program called the Blueprint Approved Institute was a part of like the metric of how we decided whether a group was going to fit in this model or not. Now I don't intimately understand the Blueprint Approved Institute any more than I understand the post board, qualifications, but I know what the post board is, and I kind of understand that, okay, if somebody's, like that's a standard, and then the Blueprint Approved is a standard. Are we still going to be using the Blueprint Approved Institute as a metric for whether or not someone's qualified to partner with us? Are we moving away from that? If we are, what are we moving towards?
Excellent. Thank you for your questions, Councilmember Ellison. I'm glad that you brought up Blueprint Institute, actually. Yes, we are still using the Blueprint Institute. We are also continuing to keep that public health approach and use those evidence-based models. One of the things that we actually learned from the Blueprint Institute and the work that was done last year in the cohorts is the number one thing that's being requested from those agencies is assistance with financial documentation and understanding financial processes. And I probably should have put that in here now that you mention it, because that has actually directed a lot of where we're going in 2024. We're still using and continue to use information and data that comes from those cohorts, those community members that go through that institute to guide and direct our work. And a lot of what you see in front of you was informed by those who have gone through the Blueprint Institute. We have had conversations with the facilitator around also enhancing that institute. It is much more of a fellowship than an institute, and both the facilitator and the department would like us to be a little bit more clear around that this year as we move forward, as well as look for opportunities that we can expand and provide more capacity building services for the organizations that we partner with. So you are correct. That is exactly what's informing the way we are going. Overall, the plan is to keep as much in place as possible that we've always had, so that we can do some sound review and evaluation as well as slowly start to implement those exciting new initiatives that council has already invested in. So I hope that helps a little
Yeah,
bit.
that is helpful. Another question that I have is about you mentioned in the presentation here, or at least in the version that's on my desk here, the history, which I remember well, of launching this program kind of well ahead of schedule and some of the issues that came with that. And my experience with this program is that while the program philosophy itself has a standard, has a rubric, I think the program, as it's been executed by us as the city, hasn't had necessarily a consistent rubric or a philosophy. And so, I ask that, I say that basically to say, I would love for us as a council, I would love for the public to get a better sense of exactly what the services are. Folks want metrics, but what are we measuring?
Exactly.
And we can't know what we're measuring if we haven't defined what the body of work is. There have been times when I've seen, some of the folks in our that we contract with being asked to deploy to do crowd control. That is outside the scope of the service of the work.
Exactly.
It is a violation of the philosophy of the work. And if they don't succeed at calming a crowd, well, then all of a sudden the model is subject to all this criticism. And so I think those are some of the things that I've been really concerned about. I think just for future presentations, would love to, for the council's sake, for the public's sake, really help folks understand what the scope of service is, what we're measuring, what success looks like. Otherwise, I think that it's going to be a constantly moving goalpost where folks are frustrated by these by this model that has had, despite being, from my vantage point, quite small, has had a lot of scrutiny, has had a lot of eyes on it ever since its inception. So those are some of the things that I'm interested in. And again, the blueprint approved question was not necessarily saying, well, that has to be the standard.
Right.
Just more like I really want to be able to know what the standard is, where people can find it, how we can sort of build off of it. So thanks for answering my questions. And that second part was less of a question and more just a encouragement, just to say I think we need to be more public and transparent about how we're defining the parameters of the work, so that judging the work isn't a constant moving goalpost.
Thank you. Thank you for that support. That is exactly what I intend to do. I'm sorry, Councilmember Ellison, still etiquette. And you are 100% correct. Many of our initiatives have come under unfair scrutiny, and at least with the Minneapolis initiative, there is a model there. There is a rubric there. There are standards there. And if we don't support what the model, the fidelity of the model, then we open up not only ourselves, but also the organizations that do this work to unjust treatment, unjust scrutiny, and judgment. And it is my desire to ensure that we're all protected. And one way to do that is to be transparent about what the model asks for, what it calls for, make sure that we provide the resources to do it well, and be very clear in what these services can and will do and what they can't and won't. So thank you for that support.
All right, I believe that concludes discussion on item 17. With seeing no further discussion, I will move those items for approval. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those not in favor say nay. All right, the ayes have it. Yes, thank you so much, Director Nelson Brown. Before we adjourn this meeting, many of you are aware that my office sent out a legislative directive that I am working on today, this past Friday, and want to just give a little bit more context as to why I'm bringing this, and it is directly related to item 17, which is the contracts we just discussed. The contracts in item 17 resulted in several conversations that my office have been involved with over the past several weeks, which really affirmed my continued concerns about the Fry's administration's in terms of the lack of seriousness about supporting unarmed safety services, specifically as it relates to a viable and functional neighborhood safety department. A few weeks ago, some council members, including myself, were contacted by current vendors of NSD who administer crucial public safety services. And they informed me and several other council members that they had not gone paid. Understandably, this was troubling, and I worked with another colleague to try to immediately troubleshoot the situation, which led to these contracts coming forward today. In addition to that, we also had a couple other things to figure out. We wanted to figure out, one, how did these invoices or contracts go unpaid? Two, how could we get the contractors or vendors paid as soon as possible? And three, and most importantly, how to prevent these issues from happening again. And I want to name, Director Nelson Brown. You quickly responded to our correspondence, addressing our concerns and really providing transparency about, the lack of needed administrative positions to ensure that invoices like these are handled properly and promptly. So I just want to take a moment to thank you for your direct engagement and correspondence with both my office and my fellow colleagues. And also, as we talked about, what can we do to really strengthen the work of neighborhood safety? Because I know this work is not easy, and there are a number of institutional and operational barriers that have existed prior to you joining the city. But with that in mind, I also did not expect to hear in our conversations that neighborhood safety was critically understaffed because, as council member and chair Palmisano named, in November of 2023, Commissioner Barnett sent out a memo to council during our budget deliberations saying that the neighborhood safety department did not need additional resources and asked us to remove amendments that would have supported the neighborhood safety department. His recommendation was ultimately taken up, and council member Koski specifically, who brought forward the budget amendment, essentially had it withdrawn, and that budget amendment would have given a deputy finance director to the neighborhood safety department. Also, during these conversations prompted by the unpaid invoices, my office learned that neighborhood safety department is struggling to keep up with basic financial administration due to the lack of staff, this capacity issue, in addition to other systemic issues that was highlighted in the presentation. I want to be consistent in terms of dealing with or relating to leadership. So, of course, my office asked Commissioner Barnett to reconcile, what he shared at the end of November in that memo and how to reconcile that with, the neighborhood safety department not needing additional support with this current update on the capacity of the department that does say you do need tremendous amount of support in terms of staffing and resources. I also asked what his plans were for 2024, considering these systemic issues, and how they would significantly impact operations within the neighborhood safety department. And instead of clarifying these somewhat contradictory statements or addressing any of these questions, Commissioner Barnett essentially pleaded the fifth and stated that he would not answer my questions until he was legally obligated to. And while I know we all, have looked at probably Law and Order and court cases, and, we are entitled to the right to not incriminate ourselves in a criminal court specifically, I was slightly taken back that the commissioner tried to use some kind of legal excuse to circumvent basic accountability. And none of my questions were outside of normal requests for information that are part of the council's oversight function. And I will name his response should be considered a major red flag to both council and residents. Attempting to hinder council from getting critical information or concealing issues, especially information that is related to our public safety systems, it has dangerous impacts. And these impacts, have effects on our residents. and it continues to chip away at our already low credibility. And it's also completely unacceptable to, normalize a practice. And this is something that needs to be addressed by the mayor ASAP. Who and why is because he's the head of this administration. So I want to be clear with my colleagues that I am concerned, though, most importantly, that the mayor and his administration withheld information last December as we were going through budget deliberations that prevented us from making the appropriate budget allocations that have already shown to have negative impacts, i.e., vendors should not be contacting council members for payment. That's a problem. And this legislative directive is an overview of the questions that I had tried to get answered by Commissioner Barnett before he cited, he was not legally obligated to respond. So I just wanted to provide some context on that. You have the legislative directive in front of you. Point one, I'll just give some context on those. Point one asks for data and information that led to the 2024 budget amendment impacts memo that claims, in quotation, NSD Deputy Director of Finance and Administration, Amendment number 6, and Senior Project Manager, Amendment number 4, that basically these positions were not needed. So just to get a sense of how did we get here, and then again, hearing a different update right now. Points 2 and 4 ask the administration to share the current capacity challenges, which I'm glad to see that's already reflected in this presentation, and also to name the potential fiscal needs to address those challenges. My attention here is essentially, again, making sure we're going into 2024 with a full understanding of any deficiencies that exist within the department so we can reconcile them as soon as possible. Point 3 also asks for a summary of the Ryan Company's gift that was given to the Office of Community Safety to support their organizational structure. And POGO, which was the prior iteration of AO, just last year, it was shared that Ryan Companies would wrap up their support in December. And I think it's important for this body to understand what those recommendations were and if they influenced the recommendations made by the commissioner during the budget deliberations. Point 5 is in response to Commissioner Barnett's choice to withhold information from council. The mayor, council members, and city employees have a responsibility to be truthful, to be transparent, and accountable to the public. And essentially, again, this legislative directive is asking the mayor for a formal response on what is the council's recourse when we have situations like this, and ideally will hopefully lead to a culture change within his administration where that transparency will be more fluid and welcomed. The council and the public needs to be assured that, of course, there's accountability when those type of engagements are not upheld, and for us to understand what we can do in those cases. So I just wanted to provide some additional context behind how I got to this legislative directive and what I'm hoping will come from it in our efforts to support the ongoing development of the Neighborhood Safety Department and making sure it's as successful as any other department established under the Office of Community Safety. So with that, I would like to ask for a second for my motion and can also answer any questions. Was that? I hear a second, and then I see questions from, Vice Chair Palmisano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm curious, within the language of your legislative directive, it says to present the requested information back to our committee by March 11th. And do you mean an actual presentation in public, or do you just mean providing the information?
I think in standard with legislative directives, we've often asked them to come forward with a presentation.
At a presentation.
Yeah.
Thank you. I feel like maybe what is, and I'm not, these are your words, and I'm not trying to summarize them in any way, but I think what might be even more valuable than responding to these points might be the availability of being able to ask staff and the commissioner just questions, though you point out that you had tried to do so. I want to talk a little bit about these unpaid invoices. To me, this is exactly about things that Director Nelson Brown had and has addressed to me in the past month as well. What I appreciate about Director Nelson Brown is she brings a rigor to this kind of work, and she brings a requirement of metrics being requested by these groups that are working on behalf of the city with taxpayer dollars that is a bare minimum. And these organizations need to be able to provide us with these metrics for them to be paid. Until these are satisfied, taxpayer dollars shouldn't be given out to these organizations or paid for something in advance. The major issue, as I understood it when I heard back from Director Nelson Brown, when I inquired and had been approached by these organizations, is that one of the major issues here is our very own council calendar and the change of terms here, right? We did not have any sort of council cycle from the beginning of December until January 25th to even be able to take action on something that was ready to go and was ready to get paid. So I just wanted to share out loud my own recourse in hearing some similar things, asking the director of the department where things were, not for one special provider that had reached out directly to a council member, but rather just in general, is there a problem here? And in alignment with, yes, them building their infrastructure and improving their own processes, there are these other things, and we were part of that problem just by nature of term change here for a while. So I just want to offer that into this conversation because I don't see that there is, like something trying to intentionally be hidden or kept under wraps that is some sort of problem here that's a cover-up. I don't see that being the case in the least, but I do appreciate your request for more information here. Thanks.
Yeah, I can just, Vice Chair Palmisano, respond to one of your initial questions, which I believe you answered in your response as I mentioned this. Again, after being contacted by vendors saying that they were not paid for services already rendered, we met with Commissioner Barnett, also Director Nelson Brown. So we met with leadership to troubleshoot these matters. And in that, yes, contradictory information came up. It's not an issue around our procurement practices. That was very clear. In fact, that is how we got the contracts in front of committee today, is because staff knew the procurement processes to walk through. The matter is, were they even able or were going to be before us if those vendors had not contacted council members to raise a red flag in the first place? That's a problem. And then in light of learning that information and having the conversations, that's when the information came up around, oh, there is not staffing capacity to do the basic administrative functions like paying invoices, which is not in alignment with what we heard back in December when we had council members who are very aware of these staffing challenges because they existed beyond Director Nelson Brown, try to reconcile this. We were told by OCS leadership that this was not needed. So in light of trying to get those two different statements figured out by the actual commissioner, we were told, I don't have to talk to you unless I'm legally obligated to. That is a problem. So I do want to note there's a different experience here. I don't know why there's contradictory statements that's being made. I want to note again, the procurement processes, our finance staff does a good job in making sure departments are aware of that, how to move RFPs through the process. And once again, it should not take vendors contacting council members to alert us when they are not being paid in order for those RFP processes to be activated. So this is, again, pointing to larger systemic issues that, once again, Director Nelson Brown, we have been aware of for quite some time, and that council has tried to take action to reconcile and trying to figure out how we can then proceed forward to make sure this doesn't happen again. And the information being requested in this LD is to get us to that point. With that, I also see Councilmember Vita in queue.
Thank you, Chair Wansley. I just had a few comments I wanted to make because this conversation feels really messy, especially because I had previous conversations as the chair of public health and safety in 2023 with the director, with Director Brown about upcoming contracts. I don't think council needed to be contacted because she made it very clear to me last year that she was going to ask for an extension of these contracts through 2024 to collect data. And then the second part of that is, it was my understanding that the contracts weren't paid out because the participants hadn't submitted the reports that that our staff had asked for, that the director had asked for, very specific things that they felt like was necessary for them to sign off on the invoice and for them to be paid. I mean, I don't know like what everyone else's experience is, but I've had people reach out to me after not receiving their payment in 2 weeks and saying, hey, what's happening? What's happening? What's the timeline on this? Can you do this? I'm not saying that these groups weren't paid in the timely manner that they thought, but just like last year when I checked on this was about submitting reports, and the way reports had to be submitted has shifted, and they were given specific details on what needed to be submitted, and then the invoice would be signed off on. This had nothing to do with Commissioner Barnett or his role in this as the commissioner over all 5 of these departments. It was specifically an ask from within the Department of Neighborhood Safety, and it was some changing that was happening, so people weren't necessarily caught up to like the expectations, and it became a teachable moment where our staff had to say to the contractors, this is how we're moving forward with a reporting system. I mean, I don't know if there's something else different going on, but I definitely had plenty conversations last year about this, and it was strictly about the reporting. I really don't, I mean, maybe we need to have another meeting offline or something, because I really don't understand the goal of this legislative directive. I can read it. I understand what, what the words are, but I don't really get like why this is put in legislative directive form, especially something regarding a summary of the mayor's expectations, like for transparency and his executive team. Like, that's a conversation that, like, what is somebody going to go interview the mayor and ask and say, tell us what you do, and then they're going to come back and report to us like with what the mayor says? I really don't understand like how the things that are listed before me are put into a legislative directive and not like a meeting with the mayor and his staff.
Sorry, is that a question, Councilmember Vita?
The last part was a question.
Okay.
Like, how is this not just a meeting?
So as I shared in my opening conversations, again, my office and another colleague met with the Fry administration to reconcile questions and concerns around the contracts that we just approved. And in that, this is where we ran into the wall of now not being provided information. So that is why doing a legislative directive to hopefully get those questions answered.
So the goal of the legislative directive now then is for the mayor to tell you he doesn't have to answer your questions, because that could be the outcome of this.
And I hope you know, again, city auditor and also charter rules says the mayor's office does have to provide information to the council.
Yeah, depending on what the question is. I mean, like, we don't know what you asked. That part has been left out.
No, I'm so glad that you raised that. So my office is going to be working with the clerks to upload the correspondences that show some of the contradictions that were raised so that we can have that be put on LIMS and public record, so everyone can see, and hopefully, reach the same kind of confusion that we got to. But
that's really important to me, because to me, this is just like, I wasn't privy to this information. I don't know what really happened. I don't know what questions you asked. you created a legislative directive, but you didn't say what you wanted to know from him, that he pleaded the fifth or whatever, however that that conversation went, like the specific questions.
Yeah, I believe, in the 4 minutes that I gave in the opening, I did address the context of, those correspondence, but absolutely, we are going to work with the clerks to get that correspondence onto LIMS, and I've always been a fan of transparency and have no problem with that. I do want to provide some clarity on a couple things around the contracts, though, that we just approved. So it wasn't a matter of the contractors or vendors needing to submit information in order to be paid. If you notice, these are amended or amendments to existing contracts, as I highlighted, in terms of services were provided and they were not paid for those services. So now we're paying for the services that were provided in addition to their already baseline contract. So again, people were not paid, and they contacted council members' offices to say, hey, we're doing the service in alignment with our contract and requirements of our contract, and we have not been, provided compensation for that. And this is why we have made amendments to those existing contracts. So these are new additions financially in order to pay for those services that had not gone covered. So again, how did we get to this place? This is what this legislative directive is to, address and hopefully, again, prevent us from having to go through this again, especially as we have the budget chair here. We don't want to be in another situation as we're receiving, department presentations where we're being told we don't need resources, and yet we're hearing from either vendors or staff something different. So this is all about using our oversight and fiduciary, responsibilities wisely, and hopefully the information in this LD will be able to get us there. I see Vice Chair Palmisano back in queue.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I struggle. I don't think this is about some kind of stonewalling of information from Commissioner Barnett or him withholding something from us. It doesn't sound to me like Commissioner Barnett is deliberately withholding a request from us or being anything but forthcoming as much as he can. But I did want to say something. I feel like I should apologize. I am uncomfortable talking about these unpaid invoices and things like assumptions when we have Director Nelson Brown here in the room. And I apologize for that. I don't mean to be answering for you, but I'd like to know directly from Director Nelson Brown, if she's willing, if Councilmember Vita's characterization and my characterization of what's happened with these services rendered and unpaid requests is accurate or not. And it feels like something we could just get a sense of right here, if that would be acceptable to you.
Vice Chair Palmisano, I want to name, we're talking about two different periods. I was not here to know what discussions went on between former, Chair PHS, Vita, and what went down with NSD. I want to focus the conversation on what has happened this year, 2024, of how did we get to a place where contractors reached out to council members about services that had not gone paid. These are very separate things, and I think we want to keep the conversation focused there. So is it about since January 2024 then?
Yes, that is. I have had meeting requests and taken meetings with organizations that said they were unpaid, reached out to Director Nelson Brown, and got information and an answer that I was very comfortable with, is what I'm saying. This is about 2024.
And I'm glad that you're mentioning this because, again, this is about the way in which we standardize a practice of how the executive administration relates to council members. We have long talked about this matter of not everyone has equal access to the administration. So I'm glad that there was receptivity and a providing of information to you. That was not the case for my office and another colleague who tried to engage the administration and OCS leadership specifically around these matters. So again, I think for those who don't agree with the essence of this LD, you have the ability to vote no. And we will proceed, which it seems like it should not be an issue if the commissioner is more than happy to provide that information. There shouldn't be a problem in fulfilling this directive. Director Nelson Brown just highlighted in her own presentation, some of these components will have information ready, easy. So there should hopefully be no issue in fulfilling this. With that, again, you can vote no. I see Councilmember Vita.
Thank you, Chair Wansley. Just clearly, I want to clear up quickly. This is about 2023. The contracts that people were not paid on was 2023 money, not 2024. We're now, this week, going to vote on 2024 contracts. So all the groups that had previously reached out, we're talking about money that they did not get paid in the last cycle, not money that has anything to do with this year, because we're going to vote on contracts for this year. So that is not correct information that it's about 2024. It's actually about 2023, and that's when they started reaching out saying they hadn't been paid, and that's when I had those conversations in 2023.
And it sounds like it's an ongoing practice, Councilmember Vita, which is why we're here to talk about how to prevent it. Sounds like it happened in 2023. It happened a couple of weeks ago in 2024. So with that, I will move the legislative directive. I got a second. With that, we can take actually a roll call vote.
Councilmember Vita,
No.
Ellison,
Aye.
Cashman,
Aye.
Trictai,
Aye.
Vice Chair Palmisano,
No.
and Chair Wansley.
Aye.
We have 4 ayes and 2 nays.
With that, that motion carries. We have basically completed all the items on today's agenda. With that, I will adjourn today's meeting.